Hi friends, continuing to the chapter Wings of the Fire and Autobiography of Apj Abdul Kalam. The SLV-3 Apj rocket developed as common as a upper stage with a diamond. Scheduled to be a flight tested in the France, was mired in a series of knotty problems. It has to be rushed to the France to sort them out. Before it could depart, late in the afternoon, it was found that his mother had passed away. It took the first available bus to the Nagarkoil. From there, he travelled to Rameshwaram, spending a whole night in a train and performed the last rites the next morning. Both the people who had formed him had left their heavenly abode. The departed had reached the end of their journey. The rest of his has to continue walking the weary roads, and life has to go on. He prayed in the mosque as his father has once taken him every morning. He told him that his mother could not have lived longer in the world without the care and love of his husband, and therefore he preferred to join him. He begged his forgiveness. They carried out the task that he designed for them with great care, dedication, and the honest, and came back to him. Why are you murmuring their days of accomplishment? Concentrate on the assignments that lie before you, and proclaim their glory to your deeds. Nobody had said these words, but he heard them loud and clear. An inspiring word from the Quran on the passing away of the soul filled his mind. Your wealth and the children's are the only temptation, whereas Allah with him is an external award. He came out of the mosque with his mind at peace and proceeded to the railway station. He always remembered that when he called for namaz sounded, his home would transform into a small mosque. His father and his mother leading, and their children and the grandchildren following. The next morning he was back to Tumba, physically exhausted, emotionally stable, but determined to fulfill his ambitions on flying an Indian rocket motors on the foreign soil. On his return from the France, after successfully testing the SLV-3 Apj motors, Dr. Brahm Prakash informed him one day about the arrival of Werner von Braun. Everybody working in the rocketry known as von Braun, who made the lethal V2 missile that devastated the London in the Second World War. In this final stage of the war, von Braun was captured and was by the Allied forces. As a tribute to his genuine, von Braun was given a top position in the rocketry program at NASA. Working from the US Army, von Braun produces the landmark Jupiter missile, which was the first IRBM with 3,000 km range. When he was asked by Dr. Brahman Prakash to receive von Braun at Madras and escort him to Tumba, it was naturally excited. The V2 missile, an abbreviation of the German word Waffe, was by far the greatest single achievements in the history of the rockets and the missiles. It was a culmination of the effort made by von Braun and his team in the VFR, Society for the Space Flight, in the year 1920s. What has begun a civilian effort soon became an official army one, and von Braun became the technical director of the German missile laboratory, and first V2 missile was first tested unsuccessfully in June 19, toppled over on its side and exploded. But on 16th of August in 1942, it became the first missile to exceed the speed of the sound. Under the supervision of the word Boran, more than 10,000 V-2 missiles were produced between April and October 1944 at gigantic underground production unit near in Germany. That it would be traveling with this man, a scientist, a designer, a production engineer, an administrator, a technology manager, all rolled into one. What more could I have been asked for? We flew in an Avro aircraft which took around 90 minutes from Madras to Trivandrum. Wonburn asked him about our words and listened as if he was just another student of rocketry. He never expected that father of the modern rocketry to be so humble, respectful and encouraging. He made him feel comfortable right through the flight. It was hard to imagine that he was talking to a giant of a missile system, as he was so self-effacing. He observed that the length to a diameter of LD ratio of SLV-3, which was designed to be 22, was on the higher side and cautioning him about the aeroelastic problem which must be avoided during flight. Having spent the major part of his work life in the German, how did he feel in the America? He asked him on the behalf of O. Wonburn, who has become a cult figure in the States after creating the Saturn rocket in the Apollo mission which puts man on the moon. America is a country of great possibilities, but they look upon everything an American with suspicions and contempt. They suffer from a deep-rooted NIH, not invented here, complex and look down on an alien technologies. If you want to do anything in the rocketry, do it yourself, Wonburn advised him. He commented that SLV-3 is a genuine Indian design and you may be having your own troubles. But you should always remember that we don't just build on success, we also build on failures. On the top of the inevitable hard work that goes with the rocketry development and the degree of the commitment involved, he smiled and said with a glint of mischief in his eyes, "Hard work is not enough in rocketry. It is not a sport where mere hard work can fetch your honors. Here not only do you have to have a goal, but you have to have strategies to achieve it as fast as possible. The total commitment is not just hard work, it is just involvement. Building a rock wall is back-breaking work. There are some people who build rock walls all their lives and they die. There are miles of walls. Mute testimonial to how hard those people have worked." He continued, "But there are others, men who, while placing one rock on the top of another, have a vision in their minds, a goal. It may be a terrace with a rose climbing over the rock walls and chair sets out for a lazy summer days, or the rock wall may change or enclose an apple orchard or a mark boundary. When they finish, they have more than a wall. It is a goal that makes the difference. Do not make the rocketry your profession, your livelihood. Make it your religion, your mission." Did I see something of Professor Vikram Sarabhai in Wonburn? It made me happy to think so. With 3 deaths in his family in as many successive years, he needed total commitments to work in order to keep performing. He wanted to throw all being in the creation of SLV. He felt as if he had discovered the path and he was meant to follow. God's mission for him and his purpose on his earth during this period, it was as an thought he has pushed a hold button. No badmintons in the evening, no more weekend holidays, no families, no entertainments, no relations, not even any friends outside the SLV circle. To succeed in your mission, you must have a single-minded devotion to your goal. Individuals like myself are often called workaholic. I question him this term because that implies a pathological conditions or an illness. If he do not do that which he desires more than anything else in the world and which make him happy, such work can never be an aberration. Word from the 26th Psalm comes to his mind while he worked. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Total commitment is a crucial quality for those who wants to reach the very top of their profession. The desire to work at the optimism capacity leaves hardly any room for anything else. He have had people with one who would scoff at about 40 hours a week job they were being paid for. He have known others who used to work 60, 80 and even 100 hours a week because they found their work exciting and rewarding. Total commitments is the common denominators among all successful men and women. Are you able to manage the stresses you encounter in your life? The difference between an energetic and a confused person in the difference in the way their mind handle their experiences. Man need his difficulties because they are necessary to enjoy success. All of us carry some sort of super intelligence with us. Let it be stimulated to enable us to examine our deepest thoughts, desires and the beliefs. Once you have done this, charge yourself, as it were, with your commitments to your work. You also need good health and a bounded energy. Climbing to the top demands strength, whether to the top of the Mountain Everest or to the top of your career. People's born with different energy reserves, and the one who tries first and burns out easily will do well to recognize his or her life at the earliest. In 1979, a 6-member team was preparing the flight version of a complex second-stage control system for statistics tests and evacuations. The team was in a countdown mode at T 15 minutes before the test. One of the 12 valves did not respond during the checkout. Anxiety drew the members of the team to test the site to look into the problem. Suddenly, the oxidizer tank filled with the red fuming nitric acid burnt, causing severe acid burns to the team members. It was a very worst experience to see that suffering of the injured. Kurup and he rushed to Trivandrum Medical College Hospital and begged to have colleagues admitted, as 6 beds were not allowed in the hospital at the point of the time. Sivaramakrishnan Nair was one among the 6 persons injured. The acid has burned his body at a number of places. By the time he got the bed in the hospital, he was in the severe pain. He kept vigil at his bedside. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Sivaramakrishnan regained consciousness. His first word expressed regrets over the mishap and assured him that he would woke up slippage in the schedule caused by the accident. His sincere and optimism, even in the midst of a severe pain, impressed him deeply. Men like Sivaramakrishnan are a breed apart. They are the strike, always reaching higher than the last time. And with the social and the family life welded to their dream, they find the rewards of their drive overwhelming, the inheritance of the joy being in the flow, This event great enchanting his confidence in his team, a team that would stand like a rock in success and the failures. He have used the word flow at many places without really elaborating its meaning. What is the flow and what are these joys? He could call them moments of the magic. He see an analogy between these moments and the high that you experience when you play badminton or go jogging. Flow is a sensation we experience when we act with a total involvement. During flow, actions follows action according to an internal logics that seems to need no cautious intervention on the part of the workers. There is no hurry, there are no distractions demands on one's attention. The past and the future disappears. So does the distinguish between the self and the activity. We had all come across under the current of SLV flow. Although we were working hard, we were very relaxed, energetic and fresh. How it happened? Who had created this flow? Perhaps it was a meaningful organization of the purpose we sought to achieve. We would identify the broadest possible purpose level and then work towards developing a feasible target solutions from a variety of alternatives. It was this working backwards to develop a creative change in the problem solution that used to put us in the flow. When the SLV3 hardware started emerging, our ability to concentrate increased markedly. He felt a tremendous surge of confidence. In complete control over himself and over the SLV project, flow is a byproduct of controlled creativity. The first requirement to work as hard as you can at something that presents a challenge and is approved by your heart. It may not be an overwhelming challenge, but one that stretches you a little, sometime that make you realizes that you are performing a task better today than you did yesterday or the last time you tried to do it. Another prerequisites for being in a flow is the availability of a significant span of an uninterrupted time. In his experience, it is difficult to switch into the flow state in less than an hour, and it is almost impossible if you are bedwelled by interruptions. It is possible to switch yourself into a flow by using some sorts of a conditional device in much the same way that we condition ourselves to learn effectively. The answer is yes, and the secret is to analyze previous occasions when you have to be in a flow, because each person have his or her unique natural frequency which responds to a particular stimulus. You alone can identify the common denominators in your cases. Once you have isolated this common denominators, you can set the stage for flow. You have experienced this stage many times, almost every day of the SLV mission. There have been days in the laboratory when he looked up to find the laboratory empty and realized that it was the way past the quitting time. On other hand, his team members and he been so caught up in the work that the lunch hour slipped by without even being conscious that we were hungry. Analyzing such occupations in the retrospect, he find them similar in the sense that this flow was experienced when the project was nearing completion or when the project had reached the phase when all the necessary data had been gathered and we are ready to start summing up the problems. Outlining the demands made by the conflicting criteria and the various positions presented by opposing, interesting, and making our recommendations for actions. He also realized that this tends to happen on days that were relatively quiet in the office with no crisis or meetings. Such spells increased speedy in frequency, and the SLV's dream was finally realized in the middle of 1979. We have scheduled the first experimental flight trial on SLV-3 for 10th August in 1979. The primary goals of the mission were to realize a fully integrated launch vehicle, to evaluate on the board system like stage motors, guidance and the control systems and the electronic subsystems, and to evaluate ground systems like checkout, tracking, telemetry and the real-time facilities in the launch operation built at Sriharikota Launch Complex. The 23-meter-long 4-stage SLV rocket weighing 17 tons finally took off elegantly at 0758 hours and immediately started following its program trajectory. Stage he performed to perfection. There was a smooth transition from the stage to the second stage. The team were spellbound to see our hopes flying in the form of SLV-3. Suddenly the spell was broken. The second stage went out of control. The flight was terminated after 317 seconds and the vehicle remains, including his favorite fourth stage with the payload, splashes into the sea 560 kilometers off Sriharikota. The incident causes profound disappointment. He felt a strange mix of anger and the frustration. Suddenly he felt his legs become so stiff and they ached. The problem was not with his body, something was happening in his mind. The premature death of his hovercraft Nandi, the abandoning of the RATO, the abortion of SLV Diamond 4th stage, all came alive in a flash. Like a long buried phoenix rising from his ashes, over the years he had somehow learned to absorb these aborted, had come to terms with them and pursed fresh dreams. That day he revealed each of those setbacks in his deep despondency. What do you suppose could be the cause of it? Somebody asked him in the blockhouse. He tried to find an answer, but it was too tired to try and think it out, and gave up the effort of futility. The launch was conducted in the early morning, preceded by a full night countdown. Moreover, it had hardly had any sleep in the past week. Completely drained, mentally as well as physically, he went straight to his room and slumped on the bed. A gentle touch on his shoulders woke him up. It was late in the afternoon, almost approaching the evening. He saw Dr. Brahm Prakash sitting by his bedside. "What about going for a lunch?" he said. He was deeply touched by his affection and the concern. He found out later that Dr. Brahm Prakash has come to his room twice before that, but had gone away on finding him asleep. He had waited all that time for him to get up and have lunch with him. He was sad but not alone. The company of Dr. Brahm Prakash filled him with a new confidence. He made light conversation during the meals, carefully avoiding the SLV-3, but gently proving him the scholars. Dr. Brahm Prakash helped him endure these difficult periods. In practice, Dr. Brahm Prakash employed the frontline damage control principles. Just get the fellow home alive. He will recover. He drew the entire SLV team close and demonstrated to him that it was not alone in his sorrow and the SLV failure. All your commanders are standing by you, he said. This gave him a vital emotional support, encouragement and guidelines. A post-Fried reviews conducted on 11th August 1979 was attended by more than 70 scientists. A detailed technical appraisal of the failure was completed. Later, the post-flight analysis committee headed by S.K. Adithan pinpointed the reason for the malfunctioning of the vehicle. It was established that the mishap occurred because of the failure of the second stage control system. No control force was available during the second stage flight, due to that which the vehicle became aerodynamically unstable, resulting in the altitude and velocity loss. This caused the vehicle to fall into the sea before the other stages could ignite. Further, in the depth analysis of the second stage failure identified the reason as a draining of a good amount of a red fuming ternary acid, that is RFNA, used as an oxidizer for the fuel power at this stage. Consequently, when the control force was demanded, only fuel was injected, resulting in zero phase. A solenoid valve in the oxidizer tank remaining open due to the contamination after the first command at T8 minute was identified as the reason for draining of RFNA. The findings were presented to Professor Darwin at a meeting of a top ISRO scientists and were accepted. Everybody was convinced by the technical cause and the effect and the sequence presented, and there was a general feelings of satisfaction about the whole exercise of the failure management measures taken. He was still unconvinced though and felt restless. To him, the level of the responsibility is measured by one's ability to convert the decision-making process without any delay or distraction. On the spur of the moment, he stood up and addressed Professor Darwin. Sir, even though my friend have technically justified the failure, I take the responsibility for justifying the RFNA leak detected during the final phase of countdown as insignificant. As a mission director, I should have put the launch on hold and saved the flight is possible. In a similar situation aboard, the mission director would have lost his job. I therefore take responsibility for SLV-3 failure. For quite some time, there was a pin drop silence in the hall. Then Professor Darwin got up and said, I am going to put Kalam in orbit, and left the place, signaling that the meeting was over. The purest of the science is a combination of a great elation and a great despair. He went over many such episodes in his mind. John Skipper, whose 3 orbital laws from the basic of the space research took nearly 17 years after formulating the 2 laws about planetary motions around the sun. To initiate this 3rd law, which gives the relations between the size of the elliptical orbit and the length of the time it takes from the planet to go around the sun. How many failures and the frustrations must he have gone through? The idea that a man could land on the moon, developed by the Russian mathematician, was realized after nearly 4 decades, and by the United States at the Professor Chandrasekhar had to wait nearly 50 years before receiving the Nobel Prize for his discovery of Chandrasekhar limit, a discovery made while he was graduated science student at Cambridge in 1930. If his work has been recognized then, it could have led to a discovery of the black hole decades earlier. How many failures must Owen have gone through before his Saturn launch vehicle put man on the moon? These 1,000 helps to give me the ability to withstand apparently irreversible setback. Early in the November 1979, Dr. Braham Prakash retired. He had always been my sheet anchor in the turbulent waters of VSSR. His belief in the team spirit has inspired the management pattern for SSLV project, which later became a blueprint for all the scientist projects in the country. Dr. Braham Prakash was very wise counselor who gave me a valuable guidance whenever he deviated from the mission objectives. Dr. Braham Prakash not only reinforced the traits which I had acquired from Professor Sarabhai, but also helped him to give the new dimension. He always cautioned me against the haste. Big scientist projects are like mountains which should be climbed with a little effort as possible and without urgency. The reality of your own nature should determine your speed. If you become restless, speed up. If you become tense and high strung, slow down. You should climb the mountain in a state of equilibrium, when each stage of your project is not just a mean to an end but an unique event in the itself, then you are doing it well. He would tell me the echo of Dr. Braham Prakash advice could be heard in the Emerson poem of Brahma. If the red slared thinks he slays, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. To live only for someone unknown failures is superficial. It is like climbing a mountain to reach the peak without experiencing its sides. The sides of the mountain sustain life, not the peak. This is where things grow. Experience is gained and technology is mastered. The importance of the peak lies only in the fact that is define the sides. So I went on topward of the mountain, but always experienced that side. I had a long way to go, but I was in no hurry. I went in little step, just one step after the another, but each step towards the top. At every stages, the SLV3 team was blessed with some extraordinary courageous people. Along with Sudhakar and Sivaramakrishnan, there was also a Sivagaminathan. He was entrusted with bringing the C-band transformer from the Trivandrum to SHAR integration with the SLV3. The transporter is a device fitted with the rocket system to give the radar signals, which was powerful enough to help it track the radar signal with the powerful enough to help it track the vehicle for the takeoff site to the final impact. The SLV3 launch schedule was dependent on the arrival and the integration of this equipment. On landing at the Madras airport, the aircraft with Shivakami and traveling in the skidded and overshot the runway. Dense smoke engulfed the aircraft. Everyone jumped out of the aircraft through the emergency exits and desperately fought to save themselves, all except Sivagami, who stayed in the aircraft till he moved the transformer from his baggage. He was among the last few persons, the other being most aircrew to emerge from the smoke, and he was hugging the transporter close to his chest. Another incident from those days that I clearly relates to Professor Darwin's visit to SLV3 Assembly Building. Professor Darwin, Mahadevan Nair, and he was discussing some finer aspects of SLV3 integrations. The vehicle was kept around the examination readings of the integrated hardware and noticed the presence of a big water ports for existing fire in a case of an accident. For some reasons, he felt uncomfortable at the sight of the pot facing the SLV3 on the launcher. He suggested to Mahadevan Nair that we could rotate the port so that they are part by a fill of 180 degree. This would prevent the free possibilities of water gushing out and damaging the rocket. To our surprise, with 10 minutes of Mahadevan Nair getting the ports received, Powerful water jets gushed out of the ports. The vehicle safety officer had ensured the functioning of the firefighting systems without realizing that it could have wrecked the entire rocket. This was a lesson in foresight. Or did we have divine protection? On 17th July 1980, 30 hours became the launch of the second SLV-3. The newspapers were filled with all kinds of predictions. One of the newspaper reporter, the project director, is missing and could not be contacted. Many reporters referred to track the history of the first SLV flight and recalled how the third stage has failed to ignite because of lack of the fuel and the rocket have nose-dived into the ocean. Some highlighted SLV-3 possible military implications in the terms of raising the capability for building IRBMS. Some are a general prognosis of all that allied our country and related it to the SLV-3. He knew that the next day launches was going to decide the future of Indian space program. In fact, to put it simply, the eyes of the whole nation were on us. In the entire hours of next day, 18th July 1980s at 0803 hours at be precise, the India's first satellite launch vehicle SLV-3 lifted off from SHAR. At 600 seconds before takeoff, he saw the computer displaying the data about the stage 4 giving the required velocity to the Rohini satellite to enter its orbit. Within the next 2 minutes, Rohini was set into the motion in a low Earth orbit. He spoke in the midst of the screening decibels, the most important word he ever uttered in his life. Mission director calling all stations. Stand up by an important announcement. All stages performed to the missions required. The fourth stage approach motor has given the required velocity to pull Rohini satellites into orbit. There were very happy cries everywhere. When he came out of the block house, he was lifted on the shoulders of a jubilant colleagues and carried in a procession. The whole nation was excited. India has made its entry to the small group of a nation which possesses satellites launch capacity. Newspaper carried news to the events in their headlines. Radios and the television stations aired special programs. Parliaments greeted the achievements with a thumping of the desk. It was both the accumulation of a national dream and beginning of a very important phases in our national history. Professor Satish Dhawan, the chairman of ISRO, threw his customary gardeners to the wind and announces that it was now well within our ability to explore the space. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi cabled her congratulations, but the most important reaction was that of the Indian scientist community. Everybody was proud of their 100% indigenous effort. He experienced the mixed feelings. He was happy to achieve the success which had been evading him for the past 2 decades. But he was sad because the people who has inspired him were no longer there to share his joy. His father, his brother-in-law Jalaluddin and Professor Sarabhai. The credit of the success SLV-3 flight goes first to the giant of the Indian space program, Professor Sarabhai in particular, who had preceded this effort next to the hundreds of VSSC personnel who had, through snare with the power proved the metal of a concernment and also not least. To the Professor Dhawan and the Dr. Braham Prakash who had led the project, we had a late dinner at the evening. Gradually the din and the clutter of the celebrations calmed down. He tried to the bed with almost no energy left. Though the open windows, he could see the moon among the clouds. The sea breeze seemed to reflect the balcony of the moor of Sriharikota Island that day. Within a month of a SLV success, he visited the Nehru Science Center in the Bombay for a day. In the response to an invitation to share his expression with SLV-3, there he received a telephone call from the Professor Davin in Delhi, asking him to join his meeting next morning. We all were to meet the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. The host of Nehru Centers were kind enough to arrange the tickets to Delhi. But he had a small problem. He had to do with his clothes, and he has to dress casually, as it won't be wearing any slippers. Not by any standards of the ethics suitable attire in which to meet the Prime Minister. When he told Professor Davin about his problem, he told him that not to worry about the dress. You are beautifully clothed in your success, he quipped. Professor Davin and he at the Parliament House the next morning. A meeting at the Parliament's panels on the science and technology chaired by the Prime Minister was scheduled. There were about 13 members of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha in the room, which was lit by a majestic Chancellor, Professor M.G.K. Menon and Dr. Nag Chaudhary were also present. Srimati Gandhi spoke to the members about the success of the SLV-3 and lauded over the achievement. Professor Davin thanks the gathering for the encouragement given by them to space reach in the country and expressed the gratitude of the ISRO scientists and the engineers. Suddenly he saw Srimati Gandhi smiling at him, and she said, "Kalam, we would like to hear your speech." He was surprised by the request of Professor Davin and already addressed the gathering. Hesitantly, he rose and responded, "I am indeed honored to be in this great gatherings of national builders. I only know how to build a rocket system in our country, which would inject a satellite built in our country by imparting to its velocity of 25,000 kilometers per hour." There are thunderous applause. He thanked the members for giving us opportunity to work on the projects like SLV-3 and prove the scientific strength of his country. The entire room was intradicting with the happiness. Now the project SLV-3 has been successfully completed. VSSC has to reorganize its resources and redefine its goals. He wanted to believe that to be a review of the project activities, and consequently Ved Prakash Sandlas from his team was made the project director for SLV-3 project, which was aimed at making an operational satellite launched vehicle of a similar class, with a view to upgrade the SLV-3 by the means of a certain technological innovations. The development of a human satellite launch vehicle, that is ASLV, has been on the card for some times. The aim was to enhance the SLV-3 payload capability from 40 kgs to 150 kgs. Ms. M.S.R. Dev from his team was appointed project director ASLV. Then to reach the sun sironic object, that is 900 kilometers, a PSLV was to be made. The Geosatellitic Launch Vehicle GSLV was also vanished, though a distinct dream. It took up the position of the director, Aerospace Dynamic and the Design Group, so that he could configure the forthcoming launch vehicle and the technology development. The exciting VSSC infrastructures was inadequate to handle the size and the weight of the further launch vehicle system, and the implication of all the subjects was going to require highly specialized facilities. New sites were identified for the expanded activities of VSSC at Vativokwadu and Valliyamma. Dr. Srinivasan drew up a detailed plan of the facilities. Meanwhile, he carried an analysis of an application of SLV-3 and its variant with Shivanandu Pillai and compared the existing launches vehicles of the world for a missile application. He established that the SLV-3 solid rocket systems would meet the nation's requirements of payload delivery vehicles for the short and the intermediate ranges for 4,000 kilometers. He contacted that the development of one additional solid boosters of 1.8 meter diameter with 36 tons of propel along with SLV-3 subsystems would meet the ICBM requirement about 5,000 kilometers for 1000 kg payload. This proposal was, however, never considered. It nevertheless paved the way for the formulation of the re-entry experiment, that is REX, which much later on became of Agni. The next SLV flight, SLV V3D1, took off on 31st May 1981. He witnessed this flight from the visitors gallery. This was the first time he witnessed a launch from the outside the control center. The time he witnessed the launch from the outside the control center, unpathable truth he had to face was that by becoming the focus of a media attention, he had aroused envy among some of his senior colleagues, all of whom has equally contributed to the success of SLV-3. Was I hurt a coldness of the new environment? Perhaps, yes, but I was willing to accept what I couldn't change. I had never lied of the profit of the other's mind. My life is keeping with my nature has never been that of a rural achiever. The SLV-3 was made not by the free force and the manipulation, but through the constraints collective effort. Then why the sense of bitterness? Was it particular to the VSSC top levels or a universal reality? As a scientist, he was trained to reason out the reality. In science, reality, that which exists, and because his bitterness was real, he had to reason it out. But can these things be reasoned out? Were his post-SLV experience leading him into a critical situation? Yes or no? Yes, because the glory of SLV-3 had not gone to everyone who deserved it. But hardly anything could have been done about that. No, because a situation can be considered critical for a person only when a realization of the internally necessity becomes impossible. And the certainty was not the case. In fact, the components of the conflict is built upon the basic ideas. In retrospect, it can only say that he was fully aware of the great need for the actualizations and the renewal. In January 18, 1981, he was invited by Dr. Bagadira Rao on High Altitude Laboratory, now the Defense Electronic Application Laboratory, that is DEAL, Nerudram, give a lecture on SLV-3. The renowned nuclear scientist Professor Raja Raman, who I have admired and who was the scientific advisor to the defense minister, presided over the gatherings. He spoke on India's effort in generating nuclear energy and the challenge in conducting the first nuclear test for a peaceful purpose. As I had been so closely involved with SLV-3, it was a natural that he was soon in a full spate about it. Later, Professor Raja Ramana invited him for a private meeting over a tea. The first thing that struck him that when he met Professor Ramana was his first genuine pleasure at meeting him. There was an eagerness in his talk, an immediate sympathetic friendshipness accompanied by the quick, graceful moment. That evening brought back memories of the first meetings with the Professor Sarabhai. As if it was yesterday, the world of Professor Sarabhai was internally simple and externally easy. Each of us working with him was driven by a single-minded need to create and lived under conditions which made the objects of the need directly accessible. Sarabhai's world was tailor-made to our dreams. It has neither too much nor too little of anything needed by any one of us. We could divide it by our own recruitments without a reminder. His world by now has no simplicity left in it. It had become an internally complex and externally difficult world. His effort in the rocketry and in achieving the goals of making indigenous rockets were impeded by the external obstacles and complicated by the internal wavering. He was aware that it requires a specific effort of the will to sustain his trajectory. The coordination of his present with the past has already been jeopardized. The coordination of his present with his future was uppermost in his mind when he went to have a tea with Professor Ramanna. He did not take long to come to the point. The Devil Mission program has been shelved in spite of the tremendous achievement made by Narayanan and his team at DRDL. The entire program of the military rockets were reeling under a president's apathy. The DRO needed somebody to take the commands of their missile programs, which has been stuck at the drawing board at a statistic test. Bets aside for a while, Professor Ramanna asked me if he could like to join DRDL and shoulder the responsibility of shaping their guided mission development program, that is GMDP. Professor Ramanna's proposal evacuated a mixture of emotion in him. When again would I have searched such an opportunity to consolidate all our knowledge of rocketry and apply it? He felt honored by the esteem in which Professor Ramanna held him. He has been the guiding spirit behind the Prokharam nuclear test, and he was thrilled by that impact he had helped created on the outside world about the Indian techniques competent. He knew he would not be able to refresh him. Professor Ramanna advised him to talk to the Professor Dhawan on this issue so that he could work out the modalistics of his transfer from ISRO to DRDL. He met Professor Dhawan on January 18, 1981. He gave him a patient hearing with his typical patent for weighting everything carefully to make sure that he didn't miss a point. A markedly pleasant expression came into his face. He said, "I am pleased with the appraisals of my man's work." He then smiled. I have never met anyone with a smile quite like Professor Dhawan's, a soft white cloud. You could picture it in any shape you wanted to. He wondered how he should proceed. Should I formally apply for the post so that the DRDL could send the appointment order? I inquired of Professor Dhawan. No, don't precise them. Let me talk to the top level management during my visit to the New Delhi. Professor Dhawan said, I know you have always had one foot in DRDO. Now your whole center of gravity seems to have to shifted towards them. Perhaps what Professor Dhawan was telling me that an element of the truth in it. But his heart had always been at ISRO. Was he really unaware of that? Republic Day 1981 brought with his pleasant surprise. On the evening of January 25th, Mahadevan, the secretary of Professor U.R. Rao, rang up from Delhi to inform him about the Home Ministry announcement about the conference of Bhattan Bhushan Award to him. The next important call was from the Professor Dhawan to congratulate him. He felt blissfully elevated as it was from his guru. He rejoiced with his Professor Darwin at his receiving the Padma Bhushan, and he congratulated him wholeheartedly. Then he rang up to Dr. Brahm Prakash and thanked him. Dr. Brahm Prakash checked him for the formality and said, "I feel as if my son have got this award." He was so deeply touched by Dr. Brahm Prakash's affections that he could no longer keep his emotions in the check. He filled by the room with the music of Bismillah Khan Seshashi. The music took him to another time, another place. He visited the Rameshwaram and hugged his mother. His father ran his carrying finger through his hair. His mentor Jalaluddin announced the news to the crowd gathering on the mosque street. His sister Zahra prepared special sweet for him. Pakya Lakshmi Sastri put a tilak on his forehead. Father Solomon blessed him by holding the Holy Cross. He saw Professor Sarabhai smiling with a sense of achievement. The slapping which he planted 20 years ago had finally grown into a tree whose fruits were being appreciated by the people of India. The Padma Bhushan evacuated mixed reaction at VSSC. While there was some who shared my happiness, there were others who felt I was being unduly signed out of the recognition. Some of my close associates turned envious. Why do some people fail to see the great values of the life because of sadly twisted thought process? Happiness, satisfaction, and the success in the life demands of making the right choice, the winning choices. These are the force in the life working for you and against you. One must distinguish the benefit forces from the malevolent ones and choose correctly between them. An inner voice told him that the time had come for a long felt but ignored need for a renewal. Let me keen my slate and write a new sum where the earlier sums done correctly. Evaluating one's own progress in the life is not a easy task. Here the student has to set his own questions, seek his own answers, and evacuate them to his own satisfactions. Judgment aside, 18 years at ISRO was long a stay to live without a pain. As for his afflicted friends, lined by the Lewis Carnal seemed very appropriate. You may charge me with a murder or wants of a sense. We all are of us weak at a time. But the slightest approach to a false pretense was never among my crimes. A minor tussle over his serious occurred at this time between ISRO, which was little hesitation to relieve him, and DRO, which wanted to take him in. Many months went by and many letters were exchanged between ISRO and DRO, and the meeting were held in the Secretaries of a Defense R&D establishment and the Defense of the Department of the Space to precipitate a mutually convinced course of the action. Meanwhile, Professor Ramanna retired from the office of a scientific advisor to the Defense Minister, Dr. V.S. Arunachalam, till then the Director of the Defense Meteorological Research Laboratory, that is DMRL in the Hyderabad, succeeded Professor Ramanna. Dr. Arunachalam was known of his confidence and he cared a little for the scientist's buoyancy. Meanwhile, he understood that the Defense Minister at the time, R. Venkatraman, discussed the matter of taking over the mission laboratory with Professor Darwin. Professor Darwin also seemed to be awaiting for a despite step at the highest level in the Defense Ministry. Overcoming the niggling doubts that has caused delay over the past year, the decisions to appoint him as a director, DRDL, was finally taken in February 1982. Professor Darwin used to visit his room in the ISRO headquarters and spend many hours in evolving the space launch vehicle project. It was a great privilege to work with such a great scientist. Before he left ISRO, Professor Darwin asked him to give a talk on the space program profile in India by the year 2000. Almost the entire ISRO management and the staff attended the walk, which was by of a farewell meeting. He met Mr. B.S. Arunachalam in 1976 when he visited DMRL connection with the aluminum alloy investment casting for the SLV internal guidelines platform. Taking it as a personal challenge, Dr. Arunachalam has the investment casting the first of its kind in the country, made in the incredibly short time of 2 months. His youthful energy and the enthusiasm never failed to amaze me. His young metallurgical has within a short span of a time lifted science of a metal making to the technology of a metal forming and then to the art of alloy department. With a tall and elegant figure, Dr. Arunachalam was likely an electrically charged dynamo himself. He found himself an unusually friend person with a forceful manner as well as excellent working partner. Thank you.